at the just to begin with, I checked the homework this afternoon, and most of you guys did really, really, really well. A lot of people had perfect scores on their assignments, so that's good. And so for most of you guys, it seemed to go really well, which is good because what we're doing here in section 6.3 and 6.4 is we're going to be using the factoring by grouping. That's why I wanted to try and cover that last week so that we would already have time to practice it and that we were kind of ready for it this week. I don't know.
Similar to what
We're going to be factoring by grouping. So like I said, most of you got that right, at least on the homework, but there's additional steps that we're going to put to it. So we're going to talk about factoring trinomials. So trinomials, if you remember, means 3 terms. 3 terms. So we're going to be factoring those, and what we're going to do is we're going to turn them into polynomials with 4 terms so that we can use our factoring by grouping. That's going to be our strategy. We're going to take this thing with 3 terms, and it seems kind of counterintuitive. So we're going to take it, and we're going to actually make it bigger first before we use our factoring by grouping. Because remember, factoring by grouping, it has to be an even number of terms. So 4 is good. 3 is not going to work. So here's what we're going to do with factoring trinomials, and we're going to be doing the same thing pretty much all night tonight, with the exception of the very end, and you're going to get a lot of practice. Okay, we're gonna do it, and if I feel like you guys are doing great and don't need the practice, we may shorten it up. But I want to make sure this is a really important topic, factoring, and so we need to know how to do this before we go on to college algebra for several of you. So to factor a trinomial, 3 terms, we will follow this 4-step process, and we're gonna do the same thing pretty much every time. Multiply the A term by the C term, and what I mean by that is, if you remember, we a lot of times will have something that's labeled like this: ax squared plus bx plus c. And so we're going to take this A term and multiply it by the C term. We're going to multiply those 2 things together. Okay, those 2 numbers. And like I say, I'll show you the examples of these. We've got plenty of examples, but that's the first thing we're going to do. Multiply that first number by the last number. Then we are going to find the factors of that A times C that add up to be the middle, the B value, the middle number. Okay? And you'll see these steps as we go. Then we're going to rewrite the expression and break up that middle term into 2 terms. So we're going to replace the B with those factors that we just found in step number 2. Okay, and this will make more sense after you've seen it done a few times. You'll be like, oh, that's what that means. And then we'll factor by grouping. So this process right here, we're going to find 2 numbers that multiply to be A times C and add up to be B. That's going to let us break up this middle term into 2 terms. And so then we'll have 4 terms, and we'll be able to factor by grouping. So that's our strategy for tonight, and we're going to do it a lot. Okay, so here we go. What?
No, not drama.
No drama. All right. Factor the trinomial. Again, that just means it has 3 terms. It's nothing fancy. So what we have to remember is, what number is automatically in front of the x squared?
1.
A 1. A 1. So we are going to take 1 times negative 24. And that equals negative 24. I will pause here and mention there are multiple ways to do some of these, but I'm going to show you a way that works for all of them. And that way we don't have to worry about learning a whole bunch of different methods. Okay, so A times C. Everybody okay where we got the 1 and the negative 24? First and the last? Okay. Now, what I want to do here before we look for these factors is I want to think. I know thinking is rough, but I want us to think. When we see this sign right here or this sign right here, they're going to be the same. And we see that it's a negative. And we know that we're trying to find 2 numbers that multiply together to be a negative answer. What do we know about the signs of those 2 numbers that we're multiplying together and getting a negative answer?
Yeah, plus and minus. Plus and minus.
One is going to be positive, one's going to be negative, right? When you multiply numbers, remember that was some of our rules way back from chapter 0. If you multiply a positive number times a negative number, the answer is negative. And that's what we need here. We need 1 positive times 1 negative in order to get a negative 24.
Negative 24.
Okay? So what I usually do, and just to remind us, is we know that one of these answers or one of these numbers is positive and one is negative. Because this is a negative, they're going to multiply together to be a negative 24. Okay? Then, after we've talked about that, the next thing is we look right here. These two numbers that we're looking for, it's like a mystery, these two numbers that we're looking for have to add up to be a positive 2. Now what that tells us is if they have different signs and they're adding up to be a positive, the positive one has to be the bigger one, right? Because it has to like overrule the negative one. That makes sense? You've got more positive, bigger positive number than you do negative number. So if I add a positive 10 and a negative 2, the answer ends up being positive because this positive outweighs the negative. Okay, so that's what we're looking at here. And once we've thought about that, we're just going to write down the factors of negative 24. Remember, factors are things that multiply together. And so I always start with 1. And since we know the positive one's bigger, it'd be a negative 1 times positive 24. So each one of these, we're going to look. Does this add up to be 2?
No.
A negative 1 and a positive 24 does not add up to be 2. So then we just go to the next one. Negative 2 times what would equal 24? And you can use a calculator or whatever. It ends up being negative 2 times 12. Does that add up to be a positive 2? No. So then we go to the next one. Negative 3 times, and again, you can use your calculator, just negative 24 divided by negative 3 would be positive 8. Do those two add up to be positive 2? We're getting closer. But it's not. That's a 5, right? So then we go to the next one. Negative 4 times ends up being 6. Do those two add up to be a positive 2?
Yes.
And the answer is yes. So, all right, we have a winner. These are the two that we're going to use. That was step 2. We got to find the factors that multiply together to be the negative 24 and add together to be the 2. Okay? Here's where we make it into 4 terms. We're just going to copy this down. X squared. And then what we do is we take these two numbers and put them in place of this 2. So minus 4x plus 6x minus 24. Now that's okay because these two together add up to be 2x, right? If we combine these terms, that would be 2x. So we're not changing this at all. We're just changing what it looks like. We're not changing the value of it. We're just changing what it looks like. Okay? Now that we have our 4 terms, we're going to factor by grouping. So let's group the first 2 and group the second 2.
Hold on, sorry.
Yep, no problem. Like I say, this is the first one, and as we go through it, since it's the same process every time, it'll slowly get faster and faster. You guys will get faster and faster. You will.
It's okay. It's okay.
Okay. Did you find your notes, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say, I do actually have an extra copy.
Well, thanks.
Does everybody have their notes? Okay. I printed an extra one last week. So then what we do is we factor by grouping. What can we factor out of this first group?
X.
Just an x, right? And then what's left inside the parentheses? If we divide out an x from this first term, it's going to be
X.
an x left over.
Oh, yeah.
And then divide out an x from that second term, it's going to be minus 4.
Minus 4.
Because we factored out the x.
Oh.
Right? Got to refresh from last week, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now remember, we always bring this sign down. We're going to factor that out no matter what that sign is. And what can we factor out of the other 2?
Nothing. Oh, wait. 2?
6. A 2 would work, but we want the biggest thing, and I think 6. And so we're dividing out a 6, and what will we get here for the first term? 1x, right? And then negative 24 divided by the 6 is negative 4. Okay. Now notice, if we did our work right over here, these two should always match up. Remember when we did it before, they would always match up last week? So then we are able to factor out the x minus 4. And what we have left here is the x. And what we have left here is the plus 6. And so that is our answer. Okay, so that's how we factor something that looks like this, a trinomial. We go through this process and we factor it and we end up with two binomials, two things that have two terms. Okay. Any questions before we go on?
Where's the what's that's come from? X plus 6.
The x plus 6 came from right here and right here. Remember, we factor out the x minus 4, and then the x plus 6 is left over. Right? You remember doing that last week?
I did that, but I don't know right now.
Okay. So I want to make sure we're good and we have everything. And we're going to see lots of, you see how many examples we have on these papers? It's all doing the same thing, wherever that, we're doing the same thing like 20 times.
It's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot. If we need to cut some out, we will, but it gives us a chance to do.
I'm confused.
No, you're not.
It's okay. Sorry.
You watch another one and then we'll see if you're still confused.
No drama.
Asking questions is not drama.
Go.
Okay, so once again, we're going to multiply a times c. So that is what?
18.
1 times 18. No, you're right. 1 times 18 is 18.
It's 1 time. I have to shout so that I can remember. 1 times 18, 18. Okay, and plus both of them are plus.
Okay, hang on. Now, when we look at
So that
this,
I can remember.
this is a positive, right?
Positive.
Just like this is a positive,
Positive.
right? Now, here's where we have to think again.
Ah.
If we multiply, I know thinking it's rough. Anytime, if we multiply two numbers together and we get a positive answer, what does that mean about the signs of the numbers that we're multiplying together?
Both of them are positive.
Both of them are positive, or both of them
Both
could
of
be
them are
negative. Yeah, so if you multiply two negatives together, you get a positive answer. If you multiply two positives together, you get a positive answer.
This is positive.
So hang on, we're going to get there. You're right, but we're going to get there.
I look at that.
In this case, it's either two positives or two negatives. Okay? Does that make sense? Because when you multiply them together, you're going to get a positive answer. So after we've checked this one, then we go to here. If they add up to be a positive and they have the same sign, the only way for that to work is if they're both positive. Because if you add two negatives together, if you add two negatives together, you'll get a negative. Okay? So this time we know that the numbers we're looking for are both going to be positive. So let's start with our factors of 18. 1 and 18 does not add up to 9. 2 times 9, so 2 plus 9 is 11. That doesn't add up to be 9. 3 times 6 is 18, and that one does add up to be 9. Right? 3 plus 6. So that's our winner. And once we find one that works, you just stop, because if that one works, none of the others will work. Okay, there's only one that will work. So remember what we do. We write down the x squared, and then we're going to put these in. Plus 3x plus 6x plus 18. And again, remember, that's okay because 3x plus 6x is 9x. So we're just taking that 9x, that middle term, and breaking it up into two convenient parts. Okay, it's like when you take $1 to an arcade and you need to get 4 quarters because that's what's used in the machines. Although it's probably not quarters anymore. I don't even know. Used to be quarters in the olden days. Probably less than that in the really olden days. Okay, so then once we've got our 4 terms, we're going to factor by grouping. What can we take out of the first group? An x. And what's left in that first group? X plus 3, correct. Then remember, we have to take out that plus sign. And what else can we take out of the second group?
6.
A 6. And what's left in there?
X plus
18 divided by 3. 18 divided by 6 is 3. And that's good because what do we see?
3.
These are both the same. And again, they should be if we did our work right. So x plus 3 can be factored out. And then what's left?
X plus
6.
X plus 6.
Piece of cake.
That's our answer.
Okay.
Piece of cake.
No.
If you understand it now, it doesn't really get any harder. This is what we're going to do over and over and over again. Okay, because it's very important. It's very important that you understand how to do this. Okay, does that make sense?
Oh, grammar.
Let's go on. Drama, what is it?
Grammar.
Dramamine? You falling asleep?
Grammar.
All right, next one. Again, the first thing we're going to do is A times C. 1 times 3. So this one times this one. 1 times 3. Always do the same thing. That's 3. Now again, since this is a positive, and again, those are always the same. What does that tell us about the signs of the numbers we're looking for? They're both negative or they're both positive, right? So both negative or both positive. All right. Once we look at that, then we finally go to the middle sign. And what does that tell us? If they have to be the same sign and add up to be a negative, they both have to be negative. So it's going to be these two. Okay. So, and actually this one's going to be really easy because we only have 3 as prime, right? There's only one option, 1 times 3.
3 times 1.
And does that equal negative 4
Plus 4x.
when we add it? Yeah, it does. So we're going to rewrite this. Minus 1x minus 3x
Minus 1 and minus 3
plus 3. And again, the reason that's okay, and you don't have to do this every time, I just want to make sure you understand. The reason we can do this is because these two still add up to be negative 4. X. Okay. So then we are going to factor by grouping. Let's group the first two and the last two. And what can we take out of the first group?
X.
An x, and what's left?
X minus 1.
1, correct. And then remember, we have to take out that minus sign. And what else can we take out of both of those?
3.
3. Now, this is the first time this has happened. We're dividing by a negative 3 here. So negative 3x divided by negative 3 leaves us with
X.
x. There's still the x there. And then 3 divided by negative 3 is what? Remember, you're dividing.
1.
Negative 1. And we have to make sure we remember that because these have to match up, right? If you put a plus sign there, then all of a sudden you'll be like, I don't know what's going on. They don't match up.
Okay.
But the reason it is because you're dividing by a negative 3. So they both have an x minus 1. We factor out the x minus 1. And then what is left after we factor out the x minus 1? Correct. X minus 3. Okay. Okay so far? All right. Okay, so once again, A times C. 1 times negative 20 equals negative 20. We want to check out this sign, which is always going to be the same as this sign. What does that tell us about the signs of the numbers that we're looking for? One's positive, one's negative, because they have to multiply together to be a negative, right? That makes sense? The only way to get a negative 20 when you're multiplying is 1 positive, 1 negative. Okay, now, so this tells us something a little bit different. If they have different signs and they add up to be a negative, what does that tell us? The bigger one has to be negative, right? Because you got 2 different signs, and in this case, the negative one is outweighing the positive one, because you end up with a negative answer. Okay, so, oh yeah, I should have circled this. This is what we're looking at. This tells us the negative one is bigger. Okay, now that doesn't change a whole lot, but when I write my numbers down, I look at a positive 1 and a negative 20. Does that add up to be negative 8?
No.
No. So I go to the next one. 2 times
-4.
negative, no,
Oh.
negative 10,
Yeah,
right? And does that add up to be negative 8?
no.
What? Yes,
Yeah.
it does. 2 plus negative 10 is negative 8.
Oh, plus.
Plus, not times, plus. It has to multiply to be this and then add to be this. Okay, because remember what our next step is. We're going to write this down. X squared plus 2x minus 10x minus 20. These two have to add up to be that 8, negative 8.
So I can't do, I just have to go in order. I can't say like 2 times -4. I can't do that.
No, but you can't do 2 times -4 anyway because that doesn't equal negative 20. Remember, it has to multiply to be this and add to be this.
Oh,
Okay?
it's
Okay.
confused for me
Okay.
now.
Yes?
I
No?
think I'm kind of sort of getting it.
Okay.
Now
Well, that's why I have lots of examples. Okay?
So it was -2 minus,
So it's positive 2 with a negative 10, because that'll add up to be negative 8. And then we do our factoring by grouping. And when we do our factoring by grouping, what can we take out of the first group?
X,
An x. And what's left?
2x.
Not 2x. X plus 2.
Sorry, I'm trying to write down.
It's okay. All right, then remember we have to take out the negative. And what else can we take out of that second pair?
10.
A 10, that's correct. So we're dividing by a negative 10. And what will be left when we divide each of those by a negative 10?
1 minus 1x and x minus 2.
Not minus, because you're dividing negative 20 by negative 10. So it'll be plus 2. And again, if you ever get different numbers right here,
something wrong.
either you did something wrong in your factoring by grouping or you picked the wrong numbers over here.
Something wrong.
Okay? Because if you don't pick the correct numbers over here, this won't factor the way we want it to. So then what is our answer? Well, we can take out an x plus 2 from both of these. And what do we have left after we factor out the x plus 2? X minus 10. And that's our answer. Okay. All right, so once again, A times C. 1 times negative 6, which equals negative 6. Now, the fact that this is negative is the first thing we want to look at. What does that tell us about the signs of the numbers that we're going to be looking for?
1 has to be, I'm getting somewhere.
Okay, so the idea is if we need two numbers that multiply together to be a negative answer, one of them has to be positive and one has to be negative. Okay, and again, that goes back to chapter 0. And if you check it on your calculator, the only way to get a negative when you multiply is 1 positive times 1 negative. Right? So that if we know we have to multiply two numbers together and get a negative answer, that's telling us one of them has to be positive and one has to be negative. Okay, so that's what that sign is telling us. It's telling us either the signs are the same or the signs are different. Once we know that they're different, then we look at this, and what does that tell us? Because they have to add up to be this. The bigger one is positive. Okay, and I just circle it so that I remember the bigger one's positive. And so then when I start making my list,
The bigger one's positive because what?
because the two numbers have to add together to be a positive 5. So like if you have, for instance, if you have 2 plus negative,
Oh, got it.
okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Then I won't bother with the rest of my example. As long as that makes sense. So the bigger one has to be positive. So I always put 1s over here. So that's going to be a -1 and a positive 6. Does that add up to be 5?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we actually just can stop there, right? Sometimes we have to do a whole bunch of options. Sometimes the first one will work. So we're going to write this down. X squared minus 1x plus 6x minus 6. And again, remember the whole reason that we can do that is because this is still equal to 5x in those two middle terms. And we will factor by grouping. So what can we take out of the first group?
X.
An x. And what will be left?
X minus 1.
X minus 1 is correct. And then remember, we have to take out the plus. And then what can we factor out of the second? What else can we factor out of the second group?
6.
A 6. And what will be left when we factor out the 6?
X minus 1.
Correct. And again, it should be the same, right? So now we can factor out an x minus 1 from both of these. And what is left?
X plus 6.
X plus 6. Okay. Now, again, we talked about this last week. If you wanted to check, what you'd have to do is you'd have to multiply these back out, and you should end up back here. Okay. Now, I don't know if any of you have wondered, but I'm going to talk about it right now so that you don't have to wonder about it anymore. Has anybody wondered what happens if I switch these two numbers around and I put the 6 first and the -1 second?
Yeah.
I think we maybe talked about it last week, but I want to show you just so that you remember. What happens if we switch the order? Because I just write them in this order. But what happens if you switch it? What if you pick a different order? Well, then we would have x squared plus 6x minus 1x minus 6, correct? Because I wrote the -1 first and the 6 second the last time. Okay. So they still add up to be 5x, right? Haven't changed anything. When we factor by grouping, it will look a little bit different, but let's see what happens. So what can we factor out of the first group this time? An x, and what's going to be left?
X
Plus 6. Now we have to factor out the negative.
negative.
What else can we factor out?
1.
Oh, I guess a 1. I mean, there's nothing really, but we can always factor out a 1, right? And what's going to be left when we divide out a -1?
X.
Because you're dividing by a negative divided by negative will be plus 6. So notice now we've got x plus 6, and what's left is x minus 1. That's the exact same answer, right? It's just the order is different. So it doesn't make any difference. There's no magical, you have to put this one first or you have to put that one first. It doesn't make a difference. You will get the same answer. Okay, so there's no having to worry about that. As long as you pick the correct two numbers over here, you just put them in. Order doesn't matter. Okay, so same answer there. You don't have to redo it. I just wanted to point that out so that you didn't have to worry about, oh, what happens if
I got a different answer.
You got a different answer? And you did something. I don't know what.
This one, right?
No,
Which one?
because you got both of those signs are the same. This is one of my favorite problems to put on tests, by the way. Because 6s with 5s, because people do this all the time.
Don't put it on the test.
So this tells you the signs have to be different, right?
But whenever you
Multiply
Do
back
it.
out,
everything back out, you will get this.
No. you'll get a plus 6.
Which one?
Everything will be the same except it'll be a plus 6
Oh
at the end.
yeah. Mhm.
So that's why we have to be careful checking those signs, and we have to pay attention to, are they different or are they the same? Because that will make a difference.
Mhm.
Okay. So let's try this one. It almost seems like we're doing the same thing every time, right? Okay. So 1
We
times
see. Mhm.
-18
We see.
is -18. And since this is a negative, what does that tell us about the signs of the numbers that we're looking for? I still don't know.
When you ask the question.
One's positive, one is negative.
Say it.
So if this is a negative,
Oh.
if this is a negative, this will be a negative. We're going to have one of each, one positive, one negative, because they have to multiply together to be a negative 18. Once we know they're different, this sign tells us what?
Oh, I haven't. Which one?
Yeah, the bigger one has to be negative. Okay. So then we're starting to write down our factors of negative 18. And again, I usually just start with 1 because I know 1's going to work. 1 times negative 18. Bigger one's negative. That does not add up to be negative 7.
No.
2 times negative 9. That does add up to be negative 7. Right? So that's the one we're going to pick. That's the one that works. So what do we do with those two numbers now? Put them in the middle. X squared plus 2x minus 9x minus 18. And again, I'll say it a few more times. Those have to add up to be that middle number. If they don't, you did something wrong. And then we factor by grouping. So what, now that we've grouped them, what can we take out of the first half?
X.
An x, and what's left?
X plus 2.
Correct. And then we have to take out that negative. Make sure you do. And then what else can we take out of the second half?
9.
A 9. So we're dividing out a negative 9. What will be left? X plus 2. Because a negative 18 divided by negative 9 is positive 2. So we see that these are the same. That's good because now we can factor out the x plus 2. And what's left inside? Or what's left after we factor out the x plus 2? X minus 9. Pretty soon you're going to hear me in your head asking this question, man. What does this mean? And what does this mean? What does this mean?
It's not okay, but I have to okay.
Can we skip the next one?
Why? Oh, you think this is scary?
It's hard.
It's not scary. It's you can do it.
We can do it.
You can do it, and I'm here to help.
Whatever. We do it easy.
But I can't take you home.
Well, that's true. All right. So again, we start. What's the number here in the front?
1.
1 times 14, which is 14. And this time we see that that is a positive 14. And what does that tell us about our two?
They both can be positive.
It tells us they're the same.
Oh.
Okay, so it tells us they're either both positive or they could be both negative.
Okay, so I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Why are we dropping the B?
Because all we're dealing with is the numbers.
Never mind.
We'll deal with the b in a second. Okay, so just the number here times the number here. Then we look at this, and what does that tell us about our two options? Are they both going to be positive, or are they both going to be negative?
Both negative.
They're both negative because they have to add up to be negative 9. Okay, if you know they're the same, that tells you they're both negative. All right, so we want factors of 14 that are both negative. So like negative 1 and negative 14, will that add up to be negative 9? Nope, that's negative 15. So our next option, negative 2 and negative 7. Will that add up to be negative 9?
Yeah.
Yeah, that one works. So we're going to keep that one. So now remember, all we're doing is splitting the middle term. We're just copying everything else down. So this will be a squared minus 2ab minus 7ab plus 14b squared. Is everybody okay with that? So if, again, the whole deal is these have to add up to be that. So if that's an AB, then these have to be ABs. then we're going to factor by grouping. So what can we factor out of the first pair?
A,
Just an A, and what will be left?
A minus 2B.
2B, correct. Then remember, we have to factor the negative. What else can we factor out of the second group?
7.
7. And what else?
B.
A B. They all have a B in them. Okay, so now we're dividing by negative 7B. What will be left in the first term here, or this one?
1. No.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't have to write the 1, but there will be a 1 there, yeah. So remember, if we do this, and it's going to be an A. Because if we do this, negative 7 divided by negative 7 is 1. A is still there, and then B divided by B is 1. So all that's left there is the A. Then what happens in the second, or the very last term? It's going to be minus, because 14 divided by negative 7 will be negative, and it's going to be a 2. And then we factored out a B, so there's still 1B left. Notice again, not magic, it will always work this way, but these two are the same, right? A minus 2B, here and here. And then what's left after we factor out the A minus 2B? A minus 7B. You're going to be famous on YouTube, the singing. It's going to be on here. Everyone's going to hear it.
Oh, wait.
Okay. That makes sense? It's the same thing even though there's this extra letter in there. It doesn't matter. We still do it the same way. Okay? How about this one? So what do? 1 times 6 is 6. 6 is positive, right? What does that tell us about the signs of the numbers that we're looking for?
They're both positive.
They're both positive or both negative, right? Because they just have to multiply together to be a positive, so they're both positive or they're both negative. That's what that tells us. Then we come over here, and then we know they are both positive, right? Because they have to add up to be a positive 2. Does that make sense? All right, factors of 6. 1 and 6. Does that add up to be 2?
No.
No. 2 times 3. Does that add up to be 2? No. And the next one would be 3 and 2, but we've already got that, right? So here's what that means. If you write down all the possibilities and none of them work,
Go with the negative.
no, if you write down all the possibilities and you've already examined all this stuff and none of them work, that means this thing right here cannot be factored.
But it's 2.
What?
2.
This?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. It could be any numbers and it might possibly not be able to be factored. Now the majority, not all of them, but the majority of the ones that I give you are going to be able to be factored because that's the whole purpose, is so that you can factor them. But just so you understand, not every trinomial can be factored. So sometimes if you're trying to factor and you get to this and you can't find any, it doesn't necessarily mean you did anything wrong. It maybe can't be factored. Okay. So that can happen sometimes. There are situations where sometimes you just can't factor.
So that's all. No
That's
answer?
it. Yeah, you just say you cannot factor it.
Okay.
Okay. Now,
And then in the test, you don't put that, right?
in the test, you would write not factorable, or you could write prime. Remember how prime numbers are numbers that can't be broken down?
We don't know, we keep doing it.
You just write prime over and over. Okay.
Didn't put it in the test.
So another thing that we want to think about, and we haven't had to worry about it yet, is we always want to look for a greatest common factor. So far, we haven't had to worry about that because everything was always x squared, something x, something x. There was never a number other than 1 in front of the x squared, right? So do we see in this case that all 3 of these can be divided by 3 evenly? We can factor out a 3. So that's really the first thing you want to do is look for that greatest common factor because it'll make the rest of your job easier to work with. The numbers will be smaller. Now, if you miss it, it's not going to be wrong. It's just the numbers will be bigger and it'll take a little bit longer, and then you'll eventually have to get the 3 out at the end. Okay, so it'll be easier if you say, okay, 3 goes into all of these, so we're going to factor out a 3, and then we have x squared minus 8x plus, no, that's not 9, 15. Does that make sense? We divide 3 out of each of those.
We don't have to do the other.
No, we're still going to do the other part,
Oh.
but we can use this part instead of the big numbers. So once we get that 3 out, now we'll do the same steps. 1 times 15 is 15. And we ask ourselves once again, if this is a positive, which it is, all these are, that's there. We're always looking at that same spot, that last number. If that's a positive, what does that tell us about the signs of the numbers that we're looking for?
One's gonna be negative, one's gonna be.
Because they have to multiply together to be a positive. And if you have one positive and one negative, and you multiply them together, you get a negative answer. So it's if this is going to be a positive, it means they're either both positive or they're both negative.
Okay,
Okay, does that make sense?
that part now makes sense.
Okay, a light bulb just turned on.
Yes.
Excellent. I like it when the light bulbs turn on.
Mhm.
So once we know that they're the same sign, then what does this one tell us? So if they're both positive or both negative, but they add up to be a negative, which option does it have to be?
Negative.
Yeah, they both have to be negative. Because if you add 2 positives together, and you've been doing this since like kindergarten, 1 plus 3, 4, right? Stays positive. But if you have 2 negatives that you add together, that's how you get your negative answer. Okay, so if they have the same sign, in this case, they both have to be negative. So let's find our factors. 1 and 15. Does that add up to be, oh wait, they're both negative, sorry. Negative 1 and negative 15, does that add up to be negative 8? Nope. 2 does not divide into 15, so we'll skip the 2. 3 goes into 15, 3 times negative 5. Negative 3 times negative 5, does that add up to be negative 8? Yes, so that's the one we're going to use. Now here's where it gets a little bit tricky because of this 3 sitting here. Basically what you want to do is you want to put the 3 out here and just leave it alone. And you want to work with the rest of this. So I'm going to use brackets just to emphasize the 3 is still here, but we're not going to do anything with it right now. So we've got x squared minus 3x minus 5x plus 15. And we still factor by grouping. And what can we factor out of the first group? And I'm gonna keep this 3 out here. What can we factor out of the first group? An x, and what's left? X minus 3. And then remember, we have to factor out the negative. And what else can we factor out of that second half? Yep. So we're going to divide by the negative 5. And what will that leave us in the second set of parentheses? Yeah, x. So negative 5 divided by negative 5 leaves us with the x. 15 divided by negative 5 minus 3. So now what can we take out of both of those? the x minus 3. So we've got this 3 still sitting out here, right? But now we have x minus 3. And what's the other factor?
X minus 5.
X minus 5. So the 3 is a factor, the x minus 3 is a factor, and the x minus 5 is a factor. And again, if you multiplied all these back together, you get back to this.
Do we have to do it?
No, that's just if you want to check.
I have a different.
No,
answer.
I mean, like, do we have to, well,
If you want to check it, you do it.
no, like, do we have to divide first? Can we just skip that top part and just
You
do
mean-
what we normally do?
Do you have to factor out the 3 first? Is that what
Yeah.
you're asking? No. And I can show you that too. So if you don't factor out the 3 first, but here's what would happen. So I'm going to erase this, but well, you guys have this answer written down, right? Okay, so we'll just remember that. The steps are going to be very
Instead of
similar.
that, can I do like 3x minus 9?
No, and that's what we're going to talk about. That's what's going to happen here. So when we do this one, what's going to happen now is we're going to multiply 3 times 45. And that happens to be 135. So you can see already that, oh, that's a much bigger number that we have to consider, right? But it's still positive, which means our signs are either both positive or both negative. And this is still a negative, so that means they're still both negative. Does that make sense? The same process so far? Whoops, that was supposed to be red. I guess I switched colors up here. Okay, so if we go with -1 and -135, that obviously does not equal -24. 2 does not work. -3 and -45. That does not work. 4 doesn't go into there. -5 and -27. And you just use a calculator to do these.
Okay, I was just, how do you get?
I'm just doing this divided by this gives us this.
Oh,
So that means these two multiply to be that. Okay, 6 I know, and so when I'm checking this, I know 6 doesn't divide in here because this is odd, and 6 won't divide into any odd numbers. 7 will not work, and again, you just
Okay.
check that on the calculator. 135 divided by 7. 8 won't work. 9 times 15, and that's the one that works. -9 times -15 equals 135.
so
-135.
it's doable.
Yeah, so we would have this 3x squared minus 9x minus 15x plus 45. And then we still factor by grouping. So first group, second group. What can we factor out of the first group? 3x. And what's left?
1.
Not 1 plus x. Right here, when you're dividing, 3 divided by 3 is 1. X squared divided by x is x, so it's 1x.
What about
just said
can
1
we
plus
divide
x.
all the whole?
Oh,
So it's just an x
okay.
minus, and then what about this one? 3. And then we have to take out the negative. And what can we factor out of both of those?
5.
And there's actually even think bigger. 15 can go into both of those.
Oh,
So that leaves us with x, and dividing by a negative, we get -3. So here's what happens. X minus 3 and 3x minus 15. Now the problem is, most of your directions, and I didn't specifically put it here, but the directions will typically say factor completely. That means break it down as far as you can. And the issue is we still have a 3 hiding in here. Do we see that there's a 3 in here? 3 divides into both of those. So we would have to factor out that 3, and I usually factor the numbers out to the front. And then this would become x minus 5. So you'd end up with the same answer. But it's easier to factor that out probably at the beginning, just because then the numbers are smaller, and you don't have to deal with 135 and a bunch of big
Can
numbers.
we divide the whole line with 3 so that it will be the smaller number?
Right here?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's what we did the first time.
So the whole,
He's just showing me.
We factored out a 3. The first time we did it, we factored out a 3. And then what we had left was x squared minus 8x plus 15. And then we just factored this and left the 3 out in the front the whole time. So that way you have smaller numbers.
So every
Got it.
time we have to leave green. It's easier to leave the number.
Yeah, the number has to stay there because it is part of the factors.
Okay.
And some,
Okay,
okay, so,
got it.
but yeah, it has to stay there. And it's not going to be, again, it's not going to be wrong if you leave the number in there. So it's not like, oh no, I missed the number. You have to find it at the end then. Okay. So you have to get it down here that you're like, oh, 3 goes into both of these still. We need to factor out that 3. But anytime there's a number here, you might as well try to see if you can factor it out. Because that way all the other numbers will be smaller. If you can't, you can't. And then we just do what we just did here.
So I would just leave it like that and I wouldn't
Yeah.
remember.
And so this is going to give you, if you do this, you're going to be almost completely right. You're just missing the last step.
Yes.
So it just won't be completely done. It's not incorrect. It's just not completely finished.
Mhm.
Okay.
Can you control the air in here?
I can't. I have no control over it. Is it blowing cold on you too?
It's just.
There's certain spots, like if I stand right here, there's a vent that blows. It must be out of that, but anyway. Okay.
Oh, I'm so happy.
She's so happy. I'm not sure why, but we'll just say that's good.
No,
For the green, when it turns green, you like the answer.
Oh, on homework. Okay. So let's take a look at this one. Can we factor out
I
a?
didn't know
Can we
that.
factor out a 3?
No.
No, because
There's
of
11.
the 11 is not divisible by 3. So now we don't have any choice. We're going to have to deal with these numbers that are slightly bigger. So notice the difference. All the other ones that we've done so far, we were able to make it so there was no number right here, right? And it was always just 1 times whatever.
Mhm.
So this one is different. There's a 3 there, but we do exactly the same thing. That's why I say I like this way. We're just going to do it always the same way. It doesn't matter what those numbers end up being. So 3 times 6 gives us 18. And then we go and we ask the same questions that Anja doesn't like me to ask. Since this is a positive, what does that tell us about the signs of the numbers that we're looking for?
Everything is positive.
It tells us they're both positive or they're both negative. That's what this one tells us.
But a friend.
Hey, hang on, you're a step ahead. We take it one step at a time.
Sorry,
Whoops.
sir.
That's okay. If you can do that, that's fine. But I just want to make sure that everybody understands where we're getting.
Yeah,
This
everybody
idea.
doesn't understand.
Sorry.
So
sir.
this tells us, this positive tells us these are both the same. Then, since they add up to be a positive 11, then we know, okay, they both have to be positive. Because a positive plus a positive equals a positive. A negative plus a negative equals a negative.
So we really have to just worry about kind of the last one.
Well, the last one, okay, so here's what the 2 signs tell us. The last one is the first one. The last one we have to check the last one first, because it will tell us either the signs are the same, like this case, or the signs are different. Okay? Now in this case, when we see that the signs are the same, then this tells us they're both positive. If this tells us the signs are different, then this tells us about the bigger one. Okay, and we'll see more examples. If this was a negative and this was a positive, then signs are different, bigger one's positive.
I think
That's-
it's kind of sinking in.
Okay, that's good. We've got plenty more examples, so we'll get there.
We're running out.
We're running out of examples? Oh no. All right, let's see. So we know they're both positive. Let's start writing them down. So 18, you can have 1 and 18. Does that add up to be 11? Nope. 2 and 9, does that add up to be 11?
Yes.
Yes, it does. So that's the ones we're going to use. Okay. So then, remember, we rewrite this thing. 3x squared plus 2x plus 9x plus 6. And again, we're not changing the equation. We're just changing what it looks like. That's still 11x in the middle. We factor by grouping. What can we take out of the first group?
3x.
Nope. Because 3 won't go. Now, did you put your 9 first? Did you put the 2 here or the 9 here?
2.
Okay. So then if that's the case, we can't take a 3 out of this because this one doesn't have a 3. Does that make sense? So we can only factor out an x. Now, if you put your 9x there, then yes, you would have been right. You could factor out a 3x.
Okay.
So what's left after we factor out the x?
3 plus x.
3. In the first term, it's going to be 3x plus 2. Okay, now let's make sure that makes sense. Right here, we're factoring out 1x. So that leaves us with a 3x left over. And then plus, and then here we're factoring out the x, and that leaves us with the 2. Okay. Then we have to take this plus sign. And what else can we factor out of the second group?
3.
A 3. And what's going to be left there?
3.
Plus
Plus 2.
2. And so we see, okay, 3x plus 2. They both have that. And what's left over after we factor out the 3x plus 2's?
X plus 3.
X plus 3. And that is our answer. Okay.
3x plus 2, x plus 3.
Any questions before we go on to the next one? All right, I want to see how many we have left.
4.
Since you said we're running out, okay, we've got 4 left. Okay. Next one. There's an 8 here. Can I factor anything out?
No.
No. So we're just going to multiply 8 times 15. So 8 times 15 ends up being, I think, 120.
Yep.
Okay. Now, that is positive, right? And since it's positive, what do we know about the signs of the numbers we're looking for? They have to multiply together to be a positive. They're both positive or
Or both negative.
both negative. Those are the 2 options. Okay. Once we know that, we jump to the middle. And what does this tell us? If we know the signs are the same, this tells us they're both negative. Okay. So let's write down our factors that are both negative. And we have negative 1 and negative 120. Obviously, it doesn't equal 2. Negative 2 and negative 60 doesn't equal negative 2. Negative 3 and negative 40 doesn't equal negative 2. Negative 4 and negative 30. And again, you're just dividing these, right? 120 divided by negative 4 equals negative 30. Negative 5 divides in there negative 24 times. That does not equal negative 2. Negative 6 divides in there negative 20 times. That does not equal negative 2. 7 does not divide in evenly. So we get to skip 7. 8, negative 8 divides in there negative 15 times. That does not equal negative 2. 9 will not divide into that. 10, negative 10 divides in there negative 12 times. And 11 does not. And then negative 12 would give us a duplicate, right? So what does that tell us? If we wrote them all down and we don't find any that work,
Can't be factored.
that one can't be factored. And again, what we typically say is that you could write can't be factored, and that's fine. The directions on your homework might say write prime if it can't be factored. It'll usually say in the directions.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So it's never going to be a plus and a negative at the end. It's always going to be either 2 negatives or 2 positives.
No, it could be positive and negative. Yep, that's what this tells us. If this was a minus sign at the beginning, like if this was the same problem, but this was a minus sign, then, and I may have actually had a typo on this because if it was a minus sign, it would be factorable. But anyway, if this was a minus sign, then that tells you the signs are different. One's positive, one's negative. And if you look back, we've had several examples like that. Actually, the very first example, when the last number was a negative 24, if you look at your numbers, we picked one positive and one negative because they had to multiply together to be negative 24. Or the fourth one, top one on that next page. There was a negative 20 for the last number. So we had to pick one positive and one negative. So if this number right here is a negative, that tells you that you're going to have one positive and one negative. If this number right here is a positive, that tells you they're the same. So that's why we always check this one first, because this tells us either they're the same, both positive, both negative, or it tells us there's one of each.
Because you're dividing. And you're multiplying.
You're thinking, yeah, you're multiplying numbers together to get this. And when you multiply and get a positive answer like this, you're either multiplying two positives together or you're multiplying two negatives together. If you multiply them together and you get a negative answer, if this was a negative, then you're multiplying one of each, one positive, one negative.
So is it no solution? What is that?
It's just prime. You can't factor it. Remember, like prime numbers like 7, you can't break it down any further. It's as small as you can get it.
So we would be wondering in the no solution in prime.
Well, there's no solving
Yeah,
here.
if it
There's
is in the test.
no, but there's no, if you look here, there's no equal sign. Or are you saying what should you write? So you're saying there's a possibility you can't do it? Is that what you're trying to say? And that is true. Sometimes there is a possibility that you can't do it. And that's when you find out it's prime.
Okay.
All right, how about this one? We've got a 10. Can we factor anything out of all these terms?
No.
No, so we're just going to multiply 10 times 5. And 10 times 5 is 50. And important to us is that this is positive 50, right? And what does that tell us about the signs of the numbers we're looking for?
Both positive.
It tells us they're the same. So both positive
It could be negative or positive.
or both negative, right? They're going to be the same. Then once we know that, then we look right here, and what does that tell us?
They're negative.
They're both
They're
negative.
Negative.
Okay. So let's write down our factors of 50 and see if we can find some that work. -1 with -50, that does not add up to be -27. -2 goes into 50 how many times?
25.
25. So -25. Does that add up to be -27?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the one we're going to use. Okay. So remember, we're just going to rewrite this. 10x squared minus 2x minus 5x, or sorry, minus 25x plus 5. And now again, once we have our 4 terms, you can't do this until you have your 4 terms, we factor by grouping. So what can we factor out of the first group? A 2 and an x. And what's left after we factor out the 2x?
X. No. 5 plus X. 5X.
You like to put that plus in there. It's just 5x. And then
5X minus 1.
1, because 2x divided by 2x is 1, right? There's always going to be something there, so it's a 1 if it feels like it just cancels out. Remember, we have to take the negative. And what else can we factor out of the second half?
5,
A
Five.
-5, yep. And when we divide by that -5, what will we end up with?
5x plus, no, minus 1 because you're.
Correct. You're divided by a negative. And so again, we see, okay, we must have picked the right numbers because we got the same factor here. 5x minus 1 is one of our factors. And what is the other factor?
2x minus 5.
2x minus 5. Okay. Does that make sense?
We'll be getting an email from me.
10 emails tonight, probably. Okay, so we've got 2 left.
Mhm.
Is that correct? I want you guys to try those last two on your own, and we're going to go through them, but I want you to try them on your own and see how you do.
Of course it's negative.
No solution.
You think so?
Last one.
The last one? Oh, I've got a typo on the last one.
Is it wrong?
I don't know. I'm going to have to figure out what the...
Hmm.
Yeah, okay, so the last one is a typo. Yeah, so don't do the last one. Just do the just do the next one.
That's why I told you in the test, we were wondering like no solution in prime number. So
I'll try and make sure. I have taken the test already, so I try to make sure that I go through and take it so that I don't have that happen. But sometimes when I'm typing up the notes, then I don't go back through and do all those problems again. Okay, so let's take a look at, or you guys are still working. I don't want to cut anybody off.
I think I did something wrong.
Well, we'll go through
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I think I know what I did though.
You think you know
I
it?
don't understand the signs yet.
Okay.
I can't do it.
So let's take a look at this. And did you guys see that in this case there was a common factor? What did you guys factor out at the beginning?
3.
A 3, and what else?
I just did 3.
They all have an X in them. Did you notice they all have an X in them?
Yeah, I didn't even.
So we can factor out a 3 and an X at the very beginning, and that leaves us with 6x squared plus 11x minus 10. Okay, and that's the normal pattern we had, x squared, x, and then constant. So that 3x, remember, is just going to stay out in the front. We multiply the 6 times the negative 10, and we get negative 60. And then, what did this negative 6, what did the fact that this is negative tell us about our signs that we're of the numbers we're looking for? Because remember, they have to multiply together to be this negative 60.
So, negative n.
One is negative, one's positive. They have different signs. Okay, once we know they have different signs, then we look right here, and this tells us the bigger one is positive. And then we just start listing.
Okay, I think what I missed is where you say the bigger one. That's where I'm like.
Now we only do that if the signs are different.
Right.
Because if the signs are the same, it's just they're both positive or they're both negative.
That one's negative.
So, and the reason is because what happens is if they have different signs and they add up to be a positive 11, when you add those two signed numbers together, one positive, one negative, the bigger one has to be positive because it has to outweigh the negative because the answer ended up being positive.
Yeah, and I did the other way. So if I change the sign,
Then it will probably work. So if we look at this, we've got bigger one is positive. So negative 1 and 60 doesn't work. Negative 2 and 30 doesn't work. Negative 3 and 20 still doesn't add up to 11. Negative 4 and 15, I think that's the one, right? That makes sense? So then remember the 3x just hangs out, and I'm going to use brackets again just to emphasize that it's out there. And we're going to have minus 4x plus 15x minus 10. Then we're going to factor by grouping. Group. And we've got our 3x still sitting out here. What can we factor out of the first group? 2x. And what's left after we factor out a 2x from these two?
3x. Plus.
You've got a negative here. Negative 4x divided by a positive 2x is still going to be negative. So we minus 2. Okay, then we have to take out this plus sign. What else can we factor out of the second group?
5.
A 5. And what do we have left after we divide the 5 out of those two?
3. 3x.
Negative 10 divided by positive 5.
I went blank, sorry. I put divided by 3 instead of 5.
Minus 2. You know, you're dividing by
Wait a
5.
second.
Dividing by the 5.
That's my bad.
Okay, so again, notice these are the same, which they're supposed to be. We've still got the 3x sitting out here. And now we have a 3x minus 2 that's in both of those. And then what happens with this one? Or what's left? Two x plus 5. And so that's our factoring there. She's having a good time.
I just know what I'm going to get on the test.
Yeah, you said that the last hour right here.
Um,
Okay.
It's hard. This one is really hard.
yeah, it is.
And then you will put no solution and prime, and then we wonder.
Well, she's never write no solution. There's no solution. There's
You would
never.
be wondering it.
Window wonderland.
Okay, so here's the typo on this one. So let's fix it, and then we'll go through this one. The way it's written doesn't even make sense. This should not be here.
It really is.
Here you go. Pretend that 2 is not there. So let's go through it. What are we going to do? You guys take me through the steps. I'll let you guys tell me.
Multiply 3 times 7.
3 times negative 7 is negative 21. Then what do we want to look at? I just crossed it. It's right here. Just cross it off on your paper. It shouldn't be there. That 2 should not be there.
So
That's 2.
Yep. Since this is a negative, what does that tell us?
one's going to be a negative, one's going to be a positive.
Correct. One is a negative, one is a positive. Once we know that, we look right here. When we add them together, we're supposed to get a positive 2. What does that tell us?
They both have to be negative.
Okay, remember what you just told me. They're different. And they add up to be a positive.
Both positive.
They're different.
They're different.
They're different, but they add up to be a positive. So what does that mean?
The result should be positive. One of the greater number should be
The
positive.
bigger one's positive. Okay, that's what,
Oh.
once you know they're different, that means this positive one is outweighing the negative one. They're working against each other, but the positive one wins.
That's what I forget.
So the bigger one's positive.
Now,
But
Then you're mad?
I bet with
no
me.
solution, right?
Oh, you're mad with you. Okay, so we write down our factors. Bigger one's positive, negative 1 and 21. Does that add up to be 2?
No.
Nope. 2 does not divide into 21, so we skip that. Negative 3 times 7, does that add up to be 2? No. 4 doesn't divide into 21. 5 doesn't divide into 21. 6 doesn't divide into 21.
7.
And we've already got the 7. and then 7 would be negative, and it's the bigger one. So what does that tell us? This one is prime.
Prime, prime. Prime. Prime, prime,
Prime, prime.
prime.
Either prime or not factorable. No solution really doesn't apply here because we're not solving anything.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Prime or not
Or not factorable.
factor.
Prime is easier. Just say prime. Okay.
Not really.
You'll get lots of practice. And again, now here's the thing to remember. You've got the practice assignment. So if you feel like you need more practice, I mean, we've done a lot of these, but if you feel like you need more practice, you can do the practice assignment before you go on to the actual assignment. Okay. There's 11 problems, 11 factoring problems for you to do for this. This is actually 6.3 and 6.4 put together because in the book, they actually separate it for when the A is a 1 and when the A is not a 1, but you do the same process. So I said, let's just do it together. And so there's 11 problems there.